Thank you so much. And good evening, everybody. I guess I'm delighted to be here. We'll get to that part in a minute. But first, let me introduce our wonderful panel, some of whom I'm welcoming back, and some are new. I'll briefly tell you, well, actually, I think you should really know a lot about these wonderful people. So I'm going to start with Richard North Patterson, whom I'm sure everyone in here knows, almost everyone knows, is a Vineyarder. And he's also a New York Times best-selling author of 22 novels. Yes. They're only 3 pages each.
Well,
but
who's counting?
Who's counting? But several of those 22 novels have been about national politics. And I'm sure many of you would know that his political columns appear regularly in the Boston Globe and the Huffington Post. And in 2017, his columns for the Huffington Post were published in a book, Fever Swamp. You can figure out what that's about. He's also former chairman of Common Cause and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Callie Crossley, who has just landed here on the island off the ferry, and she's also the host of the Under the Radar with Callie Crossley, which airs on Sunday evenings on WGBH. You got a tape on the night? Okay.
Yeah.
Her weekly commentaries air Mondays during Morning Edition, and she's also a frequent commentator on television and radio programs, both national and local, on all the news networks. She has 2 Harvard fellowships, Beat the Press and Basic Black. She has, but she's also her GBH TV is Beat the Press and Basic Black. She has 2 Harvard fellowships from the Nieman Foundation for Journalism and from the Institute of Politics at the John F. Kennedy School of Government. She's also a producer for Black Side Inc., Eyes on the Prize, America's Civil Rights Years, which earned her an Oscar nomination, a National Emmy, and the Alfred I. DuPont Columbia Award Gold Baton, which really is one of the prized awards for journalists. And for Boston Public Radio, she's earned the 2016 Best Commentary Award for Tomorrow is Not Promised, Life After Hurricane Katrina from the Public Radio News Directors, the 2015 Salute to Excellence Award for a compilation of commentaries, observations on Ferguson, America's Racial Ground Zero, from the National Association of Black Journalists, and the 2014 Associated Press, Edward R. Murrow, and Clarion Awards for her radio documentary, Witness to History, WGBH's 1963 coverage of the March on Washington, and I'm sure she'll be able to talk about what goes around comes around after all of that. And finally, Walter Shapiro, who has covered the last 10 presidential campaigns, which makes him perfect for this panel. He's a twice weekly columnist for Roll Call, a lecturer in political science at Yale, and a fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU. He really gets around. He also writes regularly for The Guardian. Last year at Islanders Right, he talked about his biography of his con man great uncle called Hustling Hitler, the Jewish vaudevillian who fooled the Führer. Shapiro was a White House speechwriter for Jimmy Carter and has been on the staff of USA Today, Esquire, Time, Newsweek, and the Washington Post. So that's our panel. And of course, I'm sure what brought you all here tonight, not any of us, but the title of this panel, which is You Can't Make It Up, or You Can't Make This Up. And I have to confess, my own head is spinning trying to keep up. Just when I think I've nailed the questions and I'm ready for this panel, CNN blasts breaking news, and I have to go back to the drawing board. The questions become obsolete. Thank goodness there are no televisions in this room, and there's only a monitor downstairs, because who knows what might happen while we're sitting here trying to figure out what the this is on our panel. Now, let me assure you, we will get to the latest heartbreaking news related to Charlottesville. We're going to get there. But first, I want to begin by taking a brief walk down memory lane. Now, it's possible that I'm the oldest person on this panel, but each of you are at least a half century old, right? Am I right, Callie?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Don't go there.
I am sticking with the Jack Benny answer that I'm 39 years old.
Okay. But I want, because you each have had a lot of experience, especially in the media, I want to know when, if ever, have you seen a political climate like the one we're in now, before Charlestonville? What about you, Richard?
Never, and I'll talk perhaps later about why I think that is. We have a president with a profound personality disorder, but I've never seen truth twisted so much that truth loses all objective meaning, a lack of respect for facts, someone who disrespects our legal institution, someone who abuses his opponents, someone who seems to view the world entirely through his own lens. Really, if I were to take drugs for days and try to write a political novel, I couldn't come up with this, because we really are being dragged into the force field of a very unusual person who is unleashing some very dire forces in American society. We now have a situation where, spurred by him, and he didn't start it, Americans not only believe that other Americans hold the wrong views, but they believe that they are the enemy of everything they hold dear. I've never seen a more divided time my life than this, and now Trump is, I believe, setting us up to say that the media is fake, that Bob Mueller is a political agent of the bad guys, and I think we're in for a really rough ride before this presidency is over, whenever that is.
What do you mean, whenever that is? You don't think it's going to go to the full term?
Oh, I think the impeachment and 25th Amendment stuff is a fantasy. At least until 2018, and only then if there's a massive tectonic shift in the House of Representatives. I do think that it's possible that he would find this job so unpleasant that in 2020 that he could announce he'd already made America great again and perform no further services. I also think that it's quite possible, watching his feud with McConnell, watching him abuse the Republicans for their failure to pass nonsense, that at some point or another his support's going to slip away, and in 2020 at least they're going to think, you know, Mike Pence may be dumb as a plant, but he's our guy and he's normal. So I think that they will put up with this guy only so long as they think that he has working digits to sign their bills. And if this gets too dysfunctional, he might not last past 4 years, even within that party.
Okay, Callie, I mean, have you ever seen a time like this, and could you in your wildest dreams have made this up?
Nope. And I have to say that Richard's assessment, I believe, is fairly optimistic.
Jesus, I'm leaving.
Yeah. I think he's going to be there 8 years. And I think it's...
Why?
I know
Why?
everybody's going to rise up because Richard was taking it from this guy and how he's radiating out. I'm looking at the response of other people and the response of people who should be able to stand up, who should be able to coalesce and push back. I'm talking about folks on his side who should be able to say, wait a minute, this is not what I say my party is. This is not what I think should be happening in the country. Yes, I'd like power. Yes, I'd like to make some policy change. But this is way out of bounds. I don't see any of that happening, and every time another incident happens, probably one that's happening right now, as you say, and we don't know about, and people say, okay, now we're going to see people say something. They're going to stand up. They've been pushed to the wall. No, they haven't.
Well,
and I don't think they're going to be pushed to the wall.
We're going to get to this a little bit later. As I said, we'll talk about Charlottesville. There have been a few stepping up in the last 48 hours or so, but we'll come back to that.
Okay.
Don't rise up yet.
Well, I never thought it was possible that any president could make me actively nostalgic for Richard Nixon. I mean, the level in addition to the vitriol, the hate, the level of blithering incompetence is what separates out Trump from anything that has happened in American history before. That said, I think there are, as awful as an incident in Virginia that we're only going to talk about later is, I think that the divisions in the 1960s may have been as fundamental in this country as we're dealing with the divisions in the population right now. Because I take some encouragement in the fact that really, in the polling, two things have happened since Trump has taken office. Number one, those people like independents who mildly disapprove of Trump now strongly disapprove. In fact, if you look at the polling, it is very hard to find anyone who just disapproves of Trump. You either approve or you strongly disapprove. And among Republicans and among the Trump supporters, as many people now tepidly approve as strongly approve. Depending on the poll, the people in America who strongly approve of this horrific performance in the White House is fewer than a quarter of the electorate. So I'm depressed. I worry every morning, have we nuked Denmark? But I also see grounds for hope.
You know, CNN just reported, following on your comment of a few minutes ago, that a majority of registered voters, 53%, mostly pessimistic about the next few years, and he's losing ground, but not so much among his core supporters. I want to, there's another question I wanted to get to before this, but let me just ask you why you think that is. I mean, why is the core group remaining constant?
I think there is, to some extent, I think there is all right, I'll be honest, Charlayne, I don't know, but let me fake it. I think part of it is that there is a real breakdown of trust of both political parties.
Yeah.
And that to some extent, right now, for example, one of the more chilling numbers out there for Democrats thinking about 2018 is that depending on the poll, Nancy Pelosi, who is pretty much 90 to 100% name recognition, generally has about a 27% approval rating. Mm-hmm. So it isn't like the voters are embracing all things Democratic. I think there is a fundamental disconnect between both political parties and the voters. I think this latest round with Trump versus Mitch McConnell is Trump is playing to the base of his supporters who believe that Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell are as much part of the problem as Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama were.
Why don't you ask, and in answering that, help us understand how it got this way, if you're going to affirm, if you're going to say yes to what?
Yeah, I'm going to pretend I know the answer to some extent, because before Trump ever came along, we've had polarization by different information sources. We've had geographic sorting. We've had demographic sorting. If you look at the map, Hillary Clinton carried 16% of American counties. Trump carried 84%. We're talking about a bunch of people that don't know each other anymore. And for Trump's base, who feel threatened, whether it's socially or they feel threatened economically, he was a human Powerball ticket. He was their chance to say, screw you, to all the people they think have contempt for them and don't care about them. About the Republicans, about Ryan and Mitch, I think that's right, because what happened in 2016 is the Republicans for years have played to get their base. They've had the race card, and in the meanwhile, they have catered to the Chamber of Commerce and the Tea Party people and evangelicals, and they have told their base, their blue-collar base, it's all Washington's fault, it's the fault of racial minorities, whatever it is. And then Trump came along, and he escaped the lab. And what he says, no, wait a minute, I'm going to protect your Social Security, I'm going to save your jobs, I'm going to do protectionism, a bunch of stuff the GOP doesn't like. So in a way, his base was at war with the Republicans. The problem is what Trump has done so far, as opposed to what he has said, is basically endorse the old Republican program, deregulations, tax cuts, slashes in entitlements and all that stuff. So Trump, in a way, is fronting for a plutocratic agenda. And the question is, to what degree, if at all, is his hardcore base going to recognize that?
But isn't he separating himself from the Republican Party himself?
Yeah, I think he is. But you have to look at the House of Representatives. I mean, most of the Republican members aren't worried about losing to a Democrat. They're worried about losing to somebody who represents a bunch of angry people. And so they're still scared of the Trump base, the House more than the Senate, because they have these gerrymandered Republican districts with a lot of real hardcore Republicans. So that's why you don't hear, among other things, the House really rising up and saying a whole lot about this guy, because they're scared of the folks back home. Now, where that ends, I don't know, but that's sort of the way I see things now.
Callie?
So I think there's two things. First of all, that base has some very basic reasons for voting for what you call the Powerball guy or the hot guy. And they don't know a lot of stuff that has going on behind the scenes, because we're all up here with the chaos that directly impact them, directly. I like to remind people that the very first executive order that he signed, the very first, do people know what that was? 20 minutes after stepping off the inaugural stage. Anybody? Okay. He signed an order to take away a mortgage credit that was only applicable to low-income and middle-income folks. That's his base. And since he's been in office, there's more and more and more, and they've been taking away all of the things that have meaning to them, and they don't know about it. So that's one thing. The other thing, the reason they don't know about it, is because there are two parallels in media now. So a lot of that base is never seeing the stories that we're sitting up here talking about. They never, ever see them. I'm not saying they disagree with them. I'm saying they don't see them.
That's right.
That is not information that they get. So you are actually having a conversation. Well, you're not having a conversation. You're speaking like this, because they don't know what you're talking about. Because what they see in all of the channels and all of the media outlets that support the kind of thing that, that President Trump and others of his ilk want to put forward are in one separate category, and many of us over here, and people in this room certainly, are looking at a wide variety of sources, and we're just not speaking the same language.
Well, I want to talk about the media in a little bit, but in terms of what you were just talking about, maybe you could help me with this, Callie, because I've been a little bit confused about why so many well-educated white women voted for Trump.
Well,
I mean, they read all
Yes,
of
they
this
do.
stuff you're talking about.
Yes, they do. Now, my heart of hearts says to me that when, this is before he was in office, that when they lined up and looked at all the things, first, they didn't like Hillary. Did not like Hillary.
Why?
Did not. She just offended them. I don't know how many stories I did with women who said, I just don't like her. Okay, well, why? Well, I don't know that she's done anything. Well, then I say, well, what about this, what about this? Well, okay, but I just still don't like her.
But take a pause, take a
yes.
pause. Very quickly, either of you have an answer to that? Because I find this really...
Well,
I think it's elitism. Go ahead, Walter.
Remember your point, though, Callie. I want you to
Yeah,
come back.
I think as much as the media practice false equivalency, elevating the email server to the level of all the horrors that surrounded the Trump campaign and Trump's finance and his refusal to release taxes. In addition, Hillary brought on, and some people in this room may not want to hear this, some of this herself. If I could change one thing in the last 4 years, I would have gone to Hillary Clinton, who I first interviewed in the governor's mansion in Little Rock in 1992, and I would have said in 2013, Mrs. Clinton, you are totally entitled to give 3 speeches to Goldman Sachs for $675,000 that you don't need. Other former officials leaving government have done the exact same thing. And it's totally fine. And Mrs. Clinton, you could run for president again, because after your strong performance in 2008, it is certainly your turn. But Mrs. Clinton, you can't do both. In an era when everyone reviles Wall Street, to accept the money from Goldman Sachs is going to cause you political problems. And to a large extent, it was Exhibit A in the Bernie Sanders campaign against Hillary Clinton that Hillary is a creature of Wall Street.
You have a comment on that, Richard?
Well, I started to say elitism. I was going to make that very point. I think there's a sense that liberal Democrats like Hillary Clinton are tied to Wall Street, are practicing perhaps cultural liberalism on social issues, but not economic liberalism, in that she is detached from the concerns of many Americans who feel menaced. I think those speeches were a terrible idea. I think they were sort of like a magnet for the iron filings of discontent, which really became, if not Exhibit A, that was the emails, Exhibit B against her.
But Hillary Clinton had an amazing record as a public servant.
Yes.
You know, way back in the day, she said women in Hong Kong, was it Hong Kong, women's rights or human rights? She was Secretary of State. She had an incredible record of public service. It was nobody cared about that, Callie?
And young women particularly. So I did a lot of work around talking with young women. Didn't know the history. And this included, I talked to my niece who said to me, I said, do you know? Yeah. And she said, I just don't get it. And I thought it was very interesting when I said to this group of young women, I just did an anecdotal thing for a commentary I was doing. I said, well, can you just go back and do a little research? I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I'm going to ask you to just go do that. Then they each came back and said, well, you know, there's a lot of stuff I actually didn't know. So remember early on, she was not speaking about, I think, her womanhood and power and coming face to face with the sexism that was definitely there. So she's a woman in power. She's achieved a lot. Yes, there's elitism, but there was a real strong resistance, and it had to do with sexism. And I think she had to take that on from the beginning.
But
and I don't think she did not. She didn't want to. And I get that. But
she got more votes than Donald Trump.
Well, in the end,
there are people today who are calling for the dismantling of the Electoral College because that's what took him over. What do you think about that?
That she got more votes? Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I think more people voted for her, but no, I think that toward the end, a lot of folks were wondering exactly who is this guy and what is going to happen. I mean, we know that he's kind of an empty suit, or he looked like an empty suit. You could look at it, but people were refusing to deal with what she brought to the table in its fullness at that point. I also think, you know, there was some messaging she could have done a little stronger, and in some other communities that I don't think she showed up in that might have helped her. So there you have it. It was a combination of it. There's not one thing, but it was a number of things. Let me go back to the original question you asked me.
Thank you for remembering the point.
And I just want to say that there were any number of people who would say, I don't like what he says about this. Yeah, I know he's kind of a racist, but you know, on the other issues, on the economic ones, he is speaking my language. So people made a concerted decision that that's not really that important in their lives. And so therefore, these race issues, the other issues having to do with, you know, folks that maybe have less than we have, they're just going to put to the side, and they're just going to run with the message that he put out and seemed to believe, which is that the factories are coming back, we're going to make America great again. I mean, people argued with me about these factories coming back. Yes. And I said, what? They're coming back, but there'll be robots in them. And they said, well, I don't believe that. Okay, well, I'm just saying that there was a lot of willingness to put aside what I saw in a very stark way and wrote about in a very stark way, and it just didn't seem to impact other people in and around their vote.
Richard, I want to ask you, because you sometime, I think it was in 2 years ago or so.
June 2016.
You wrote about the man who calls himself the Trumpster. What were you thinking at that time? I mean, did you think we would arrive where we are today when you wrote that very critical piece?
I thought if we were going to elect Trump, we were going to be here. And here was what I thought. I mean, first of all, I wasn't a psychiatrist, so I didn't have any professional strictures against saying what I thought. I wasn't a journalist, so I didn't feel any constraint not to speak to what I thought was wrong with him. Walter and I had a gentle argument about this last year. But, I mean, the truth is, I thought that all the business about how he was going to become presidential, or that they'd put some wise, square-jawed, gray-haired white men around him and he would be all fine and he'd be docile and he'd learn statecraft, was nonsense. And actually, I copied a couple of pages because it's hard to summarize what I said, so I just like to write a little bit of what I said. And I said all the hyperventilation of the media, parsing his position, pontificating on his strategy and intuition, is a poisonous form of the political correctness he otherwise deplores, normalizing the abnormal by shoehorning him into the usual analytic boxes. What it yields is, in great part, rubbish. There is only one organizing principle that makes sense for his wildly oscillating behaviors and utterances, the clinical definition of narcissistic personality disorder. The Mayo Clinic describes it as a mental disorder in which people have an inflated sense of their own importance, a deep need for admiration, and lack of empathy for others. I then went on to cite a few of the symptoms, so try these. An exaggerated sense of self-importance, unwarranted belief in your own superiority, preoccupation with fantasies of your own success and power and brilliance, an unreasoning fury at people you perceive as thwarting your wishes or desires, a tendency to act on impulse, a need always to be right, an inability to tolerate criticism of critics, a compulsion to conform your ever-shifting sense of reality to satisfy your inner requirements, a belief that you're above the rules, in sum, a total incapacity to separate the world from your own psychodrama. I then went on to say, what if he became president? One can forecast the inevitable day-to-day damage to our country. The lashings out, the abuses of power, the mercurial and confidence-destroying lies and changes of mind, the havoc his distorted lens would wreak upon our institutions and our spirit. The most dangerous of all is the collision between a volatile world, a leader unable to perceive external reality, and the often unbearable pressures of the presidency. That Trump's judgment would truck time and time again is certain. The only question is how dangerous the moment. That was June 2016. I'll certainly stand by that.
But I read the article, and you also said that the media had failed. The media were at fault. So let's go there, since we're all media people up here. What do you think about the role of the media in creating the possibility and then the reality of a Trump presidency?
Well, to quote somebody, it was huge. Before the Republican primaries even started, according to the Shorenstein Center of Media Studies at Harvard, the cable and broadcast news channels gave him $3 billion of free media. They basically just turned on the microphone and let him run with it for minutes and minutes and minutes. It was like one long infomercial. No candidate in history has ever gotten that kind of unfiltered access, and they did it because they were making money. The print media was better, but nobody else could go and meet the press, just call in. Nobody else could just give a speech and be covered for 40 minutes, just saying whatever they said without analysis. And so what happened is that the media, for commercial reasons, helped make this guy a success. In the meanwhile, they were doing, and I'll be brief because the others need to talk, they were doing what people do. You're used to talking about issues. You're used to talking about tactics. You're used to talking about people who are normal. And they normalized him by analyzing him as if there was always a reason for what he was doing. Yeah, there was a reason. He's nuts.
Walter, you have a comment on that?
Well, first of all, I agree with almost all of what Rick said. I happen to like the phrase, and it's a New York phrase that Trump would respect. I don't go for clinical definitions of him. I'm just happy to go with the New York word wacko to describe him. But there is a large problem with the media, and it is exactly that Trump dominated the TV screens like no one else, as Rick pointed out. And I want to immortalize a quote from Les Moonves, who is the CEO of, I guess, CBS, who said at a industry conference in Los Angeles in February of 2016, and this is almost word for word, they say Donald Trump is bad for America, but he's been damn good for CBS. So I say, bring it on, Donald. This is the Tiffany Network. This is not exactly the way that Walter Cronkite or Edward R. Murrow would have treated a presidential campaign. That said, there is this need to have a sense of you can't feel like you're in the tank for one candidate.
But-
So there was enough false equivalence, more hostility to Hillary than probably her email server deserved.
So given what you both have said, and you probably agree, right, Callie?
Yeah, I was
Okay,
gonna say.
okay. Just want to know if you agree, because I
Okay,
want to
all
ask
right.
you.
Okay.
Because I do want to ask you, because I might forget it if you get too profound up here with your comment. So that was fake news, wasn't it? What you're talking about?
Well, it was certainly, if you have Donald Trump hawking Trump steaks on television and talking endlessly about how he's the greatest businessman in the history of the world, to then come on with a investigative a piece on his bankruptcy, that people remember that Donald Trump is the greatest businessman in the history of the world. And part of the appeal of Trump was, as a businessman, Americans think if only government could be run like a business. God, we're now being run like the Trump organization.
So Callie, doesn't that feed into the notion of fake news, what you're just talking about? I mean, you know, here's Trump calling into CNN, talking as long as he wants to talk, the examples you just gave, and so that gives rise to fake news, doesn't it?
Well, I'm just not gonna, I'm not gonna use that terminology because real news is not fake, so let's start there. The second thing is
You don't think it was fake to allow him to spend that kind of time bullshit? No, I didn't say
Yes.
that.
I think it was inappropriate, and I think it was not good news judgment, and I also think it grew out of a kind of arrogance, thinking that the guy was a joke and this was entertainment. So that really needs to be said. So it went on and on and on because until people started to realize, wait a minute, people are really listening to this, this is really happening, and now we're down the road now, how do we course correct? So that needs to be said. Every 4 years, when the election happens, Harvard brings in every single campaign operative from the beginning all the way to the end to analyze what happened in the campaign. In this last one, the only thing that came out of it was a big fight between Kellyanne Conway and Jen Palmieri from the Democratic side. But there was a lot of other rich discussion about it. And something that I thought was really fascinating was early on in the day when all of the campaign, all the 17 Republican candidates that were, pushed aside, every single one of them said, yeah, you all said we had an opportunity to come on just like he did. We could come on. Why didn't we call in? Why didn't we show up? But what would happen is they wanted us to talk about him. So it wasn't about my candidate. It was about, what do you say about what Trump said yesterday? So it was a vicious circle. They refused to do it, many of them. And then when they did engage in it, that's exactly where the conversation went. And again, this went on down the road until a lot of media outlets said, wait a minute, this is really not making any sense. And we've gone for the okie doke, really, is what happened.
And what point was that?
I would say about the time that he started knocking off primary candidates with substance. You didn't have to like Jeb Bush, but he was saying some things that had some substance. You didn't have to like some of the other candidates. They had some points to make. They were being dismissed as if they were people that fell off the turnip truck yesterday. And also what they were saying was not given that much space to really be compared to what Trump was saying. So people could say, does that make sense? Oh, I don't know if that makes sense. So I say that it was a good 4 or 5 months of this going on, and it just sort of took hold. Then what Walter is saying about people making an assumption then at that point, and there we were. And the course correction, you end up thinking Trump steaks and not Trump bankruptcy or bad businessman. You know?
So when you had the course correction, you got a lot of anti-Trump media. Did that help to motivate his base, Richard?
Well, I think one thing that goes on here is that the more we, assuming that we for the moment are mainstream media, report, the more he uses this as foils. I mean, I think he used reporters and demonstrators throughout the campaign. He picked on the press at rallies. He finds them a convenient foil, and also he needs desperately for his own survival to discredit them. So it's not only a tactic. I mean, it's him versus them. It's a cage match, and he wants to win. So I think now that the Times and the Post and others are doing great work, the question is who they're speaking to.
Exactly.
Because in many cases, as Callie suggested earlier, the folks who should be at least interested in the counter view of Trump don't want to hear it. And so the media is becoming the antagonist. And he will make an antagonist of Mitch McConnell, Robert Mueller, his own Justice Department, the media, and anyone who's in his way. I mean, we're just headed for Gotterdammerung. This thing is going to be weirder and weirder and more divisive and more divisive. And the question is, will the Trump base be sucked up with it? And I think a lot of them will be.
Should note that the new ad for Trump, I guess 2020 or whenever, has one of the slides. They won't give him a chance to do his work. These are his enemies, and there are journalists in that picture, little small pictures of journalists. These are the enemies.
Walter, what is the role of opinion writers? Are they just preaching to the converted also?
I mean, that's a wonderful question, because I totally, every time I write a column, I say maybe there's a paragraph in here that can convince a Republican to break with Trump, and that it's really easy to take the easy road and say, to denounce Trump with every sentence in a way that makes everyone feel good, except doesn't communicate with people who don't share your basic premises. I really think that right now, for example, I was talking with two top Republican strategists off the record, and both of them said, please, Democrats, talk about Russia all through the 2018 election. It's our best hope of holding the House. We don't want to talk about health care. We don't want to talk about jobs. We really want you to focus on Russia, and if you make this a referenda on impeachment, even better. Right now, for all the mysterious nature of Jared Kushner's finances, Paul Manafort's corrupt life, there is still not a single sentence that you could say that will convince a Republican member of Congress to vote for impeachment. And I'm really worried if the Democrats take the House in 2018, with the best intentions, the Democrats will repeat the folly of the Bill Clinton impeachment, where one party got it through the House and got nowhere in the Senate. Because, all right, let me end by just saying my fantasy for how the one-term Trump presidency ends. It's the morning of January 20th, 2021. It's 8 in the morning. Donald Trump is at 7% in the approval ratings. The Trump empire is in shambles. Jared Kushner is, shall we say, the second generation in his family to be guests of the federal government. Ivanka has fled back to New York, and in desperation, Trump turns on Fox and Friends and realizes even they're attacking him. And his last moments in the Oval Office are one lonely man screaming at the TV set.
That's the novel that you want to write.
I love that. I love that novel, and like Walter, I have imaginary friends, reasonable Republicans. I write for them, and it is very difficult. Very often, I'm speaking to Democrats about how best to approach this, and I tend to agree with Walter. But I just want to say one thing about Russia. I think as a political matter, Walter is right. I also, in my distant youth, used to prosecute cases. And this thing really smells to me. The way that he tried to cover up and protect Flynn, the way he's tried to fire Comey, the way he's savaging Mueller, the way he complains about Sessions, there is something there that really bothers him. I don't have any doubt characterologically that if Donald Trump found out the Russians were willing to help him, he'd say yes. I don't have any doubt characterologically that Vladimir Putin would want him to know. Now, whether this also has financial aspects, and I note that it may well because Mueller's people seem to be specialists in white-collar financial stuff. But there is something there, and this thing is not going to go away with a whimper, I think, because Trump and his campaign are guilty of nothing. Something happened.
Yeah, but excuse me. What I'm hearing, though, from this hardcore base, his base, they don't really care about Russia. They have always cared about their pocketbooks, their financial situations, which is, they don't have any jobs. The jobs are leaving. So my sense is that they don't really care about this Russia thing, no matter how much and how persuasively you write about it. Am I right, Kelly?
I agree with you. I think what you have to do is to keep coming. The original question was, what is the role of somebody writing about this? You have to keep coming back to some basics. Lying. People can understand lying, whether they like Russia or not. A certain amount of being hypocritical about this, lying about issues that matter to them, show the connectivity of why other people are concerned about Russia and what that means in their lives. You just have to keep writing it.
Is anybody doing that?
Let me just say this. I still don't get, though, just to say, having done some of this, is that why people are not upset that the man who's made the message, Make America Great Again, has all of his stuff made out of the country. Why is that not upsetting? So that's the hard rock pushing up the hill we're at when you have evidence like that and you say to people, he doesn't even make his stuff here. What are you talking about? And you still have to, I think, come back to it and say it again and again. But you have to acknowledge, I think, that there are a great amount of people who do not agree that Russia has any meaning in their lives.
A small observation. Karl Rove said way back about 10 years ago, the problem with Democrats and liberals is we live in a, quote, reality-based community. And that's no longer where the action is. And I think that's the problem. Briefly about Russia. If indeed evidence emerges that there was collusion between Trump or Trump's campaign in Russia or financial entanglements with Russia, which look unsavory, his base may not care. Well, I think Republicans in office will, and I think it will pose some difficulty for him.
I want to stress that while I don't think politically Democrats should run on Russia in 2018, I certainly support everything that Mueller is doing. I certainly believe that the Senate Intelligence and Judiciary Committees should do much more in the way of public hearings to find out what did happen. I'm just saying it's not necessarily a voting issue. What might be a voting issue is corruption. Yes. Not Russia per se, but the fact is that the whole myth surrounding rich people in politics, Franklin Roosevelt, Jack Kennedy, Nelson Rockefeller, is they're too rich to steal. In the case of Trump, he's probably not as rich as he claims, and he's eager to steal.
Let me ask you this, because we are at a time in which media are undergoing big changes. And we have generational changes. You mentioned that earlier. I see young people on their phones all the time reading and sending tweets. So I want to talk about the role of tweets and its impact on media and the public, because you see what's happening.
Well, he rallies people with those tweets, but they're also an immense distraction. One of the things that...
But people are being distracted. Media are being distracted.
Well, but he's not passing anything. So we're being entertained. I'm reminded of Gladiator, Are You Not Entertained? But we are also, it's also a widely dysfunctional administration except for regulations. And except for Gorsuch, they haven't done anything. And very often, he tramples on his message. and tramples on the ability of Republicans to pass this stuff, whether you like it or not, by setting up the firestorm of the moment, whether it's Mika Brzezinski's phony facelift or whatever else it was. So indeed, he is very effective in getting through to his people, but he also very often undermines his own message.
Well, he's able to get through to his people because we're amplifying the tweets. Now, let me just say, I do believe that presidential tweets are history and have to be recorded and dealt with. I do. And in this case, because this is how he communicates, I do think it requires some analysis. I guess what I don't think it requires is every second response to it. And I don't know where the balance is, but I think sometimes we go overboard, we in the media, on some of these tweets and less on others. We got to figure out how to address it as important information because it's coming from him, but not be drowning in it every single day. And that's a balance.
Walter, with the exception of, say, maybe the New York Times and the Washington Post and maybe the Huffington Post, where do you see media being effective today? Is it starting to make a difference other than with those maybe 3 or 4 outlets, or are they growing?
I think to some extent the level of focus on the Trump administration, and I think the LA Times is doing some good work. The only publication that really disappoints me these days is the Wall Street Journal, which at some points looks like it's pulling its punches in regards to Trump. But I think that a lot of these stories are getting out, but again, most Americans are not in the habit of spending Sunday nights listening to people bloviate on politics.
Sunday mornings.
Or Sunday morning. No, I meant in this case.
But we got to finish this panel before Game of Thrones comes on
Yeah.
tonight.
So to some
What's the
extent,
difference?
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I've been topped. I'm not going to say another word.
I do want to say one thing about tweeting, though. Tweeting has never been as universally enjoyed or employed by a lot of people as we are led to believe. If there's some tech person in the audience, they can tell you that. So it has a narrow audience anyway. So let's not think that everybody is tweeting. The kids are getting their news on Snapchat, for one thing. So there are many other vehicles, and I do think there's good work. The guy that just wrote the piece in Atlantic about Trump is getting some things accomplished, but he's not talking about them. That was a good piece. There's a lot of good work by BuzzFeed, I think.
Yes.
BuzzFeed is
Yeah.
doing some excellent work. Politico every now and then. But, I mean, there is good work being done, and we've already acknowledged the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. But again, people have to, it's not just delivered to you. You have to, look for it and want it.
You have to be energized
You have to be
get it.
energized
Yeah.
about it. But I think the tweeting thing is only important because he's made it a vehicle and we have to figure out how to deal with it. But everybody is not tweeting. Even the kids aren't tweeting like that.
A brief observation about tweeting. It's very possible for opinion writers to get caught up in the tweet of the day.
Yes.
And they're just playing Trump's game. They're just
right.
being churned in the mix master again and again and again. And when I write a column, I try to back off a little bit and say, what is this whole thing about? What is he doing in foreign policy? What's he doing or not doing about infrastructure? What is his tax program really? That kind of thing. And I may use a tweet to illustrate an inconsistency, but that's it. This business of being indignant every day about what he does in the moment is just playing his game.
And why was this tweet put out at this particular time? What else is going on to distract us because he put that tweet out?
What do you make of the fact that some of these tweets come out at 2 o'clock in the morning?
I think what we're getting is the first unfiltered
Yes.
look at the psyche of a president of the United States. And since that unfiltered look is happening with Donald Trump in the White House, it is frightening beyond human description. But at the same point, I am somebody who thinks these tweets should be covered because they are a look at the mentality of a man who our system has given immense power, and the more we know about his inner workings, as troubling as they may be, the better off we are as both citizens and journalistically.
All right, I promised that we were going to talk about these things for a bit, but let's now turn to Charlottesville, because I think that's on just about everybody's mind. It certainly is on mine. And I'm a little nervous because, as I said, we don't have a television in the room, so God knows what's happened since we started this panel tonight. But what is your reaction, Rick, to Charlottesville? What do you think should be done?
Well, I want to say briefly that the history of race in the Republican Party, the gaming history preceded Trump. We forget that Ronald Reagan opened his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, for no better reason than 13 years before three civil rights workers were killed. We forget the voting fraud stuff they do to drive people off the rolls. We tend to forget already that Trump was the protagonist of the birther movement was clearly racist. So this stuff has been bubbling in Republican politics for a long time. The difference is that Trump made it a lot more overt. And about Charlottesville, I watched that thing yesterday, and they gave him something to read. I assume written by Steve Miller or someone like that. It was completely morally bankrupt. He said the minimum possible to acknowledge that racism was bad and violence was bad. He said nothing about white supremacy. He said nothing about people coming to Charlottesville. He said nothing about the reason for it. And he got off stage as quickly as he could because I think he knows that these folks are part of his base, and whether they're crazy all-right racists or just people who are moved by difficult feelings about race, he just didn't want to get engaged in the business of actually doing the moral work that the President of the United States should be. As to what we should do, the Republican Party should be the first, and I gather that some actually are, to say, wait a minute, this is racism, this is violence, this is domestic terrorism, this is unacceptable. And we need to say more, and you, Mr. President, need to say more. But I think he's doing a little dog whistle with this stuff, and I think also he hates to be told what to do, even if what he's being told is the only decent thing a president could do.
Callie, what about the description in his comments about all of the people, well, whatever it was, I can't remember the exact quote.
Everybody had a
but
part in it.
Yeah, everybody had a part in it. How do you react to that?
Well, that's a lie, but he's been saying that at every point that there is some point of racial tension, well, all sides have participated. That's been his standard line. I mean, moral bankruptcy is the least of it, I guess. He didn't intend to say anything. Even at the height of the attacks on the Jewish centers, there he is with his daughter and his son-in-law. You'd think just out of family, you'd say a little bit more. He never did. He didn't.
So what do you think is going on?
What's going on is that what's going on is what David Duke said. Look in the mirror, we're the people that put you in there, and you better not forget it.
You agree with that?
That's what I think is happening.
Not entirely. I think a lot of what we're witnessing with Trump is that this is not thought out as a political strategy. There is a part of Donald Trump, since the entire world revolves around him, that no one who approves of him, even if you're carrying a Nazi flag, can be all bad. And as a result, there is a total reluctance to in any way, shape, or form repudiate any Trump supporter. And I wonder if at least part of this relates to his fanboy approach to Vladimir Putin, in the sense that Putin says nice things about him. That is the measure for who is good and who is evil in Donald Trump's warped world.
Let me add one other thing.
And while she's adding that, audience, get ready. We're coming to you for a few questions.
What does it say that the 3 people killed in what was trying to be a race riot are 3 white people? Now, so I'm interested in the fact that he's not commented in that way. I mean, these are 3 white people that got killed, so you would think, given where he's coming from, we might have heard a little something more. But I think it's interesting, and I'd like to see how that's going to play out. And I think, I have to repeat it, I think that David Duke's comment is really quite telling. Not that I pay attention to David Duke, but his comment about who the supporters are, and you better be paying attention to us and realize that we're not going away. You open up the door, we walk through, and we're claiming that space.
All right, let's see if we have any questions from the
I have a
listeners.
question.
One, and please, everybody, identify yourself. You know, I say.
I'm Robert Brustein, Huffington Post, I guess. And I would like to ask the panel about the role of entertainment in this phenomenon, because clearly he's gotten where he is because he is a source of extraordinary entertainment, and he magnetizes all of us. This panel wouldn't exist if he didn't have this magnetic quality of entertainment and the capacity to attract sponsors and advertisers, so that people sell newspapers and people watch television because this man is on it, and he's on it because he makes such extravagant statements, but he entertains.
Well, I think that's a statement as opposed to a question.
Well,
If you wanna
but
comment.
I would like to comment, because Trump started not as a politician or an office holder. He started as a character in The Apprentice. He played himself in what was clearly entertainment. And millions and millions of people became familiar with him because he played a successful businessman on television. So the entertainment business made this guy conceivable to a bunch of people, but for which Hillary Clinton or somebody else would be president today.
All right, we
And I
have
don't think
one
we should-
question in the back of the room.
We should underestimate the power of celebrity. So there is entertainment, but there is also the power of celebrity, and that's who he is to a lot of people.
It certainly does not make me happy that Kid Rock looks like he's going to be the Republican Senate nominee in Michigan.
Sure. Hi, my name is Jordan Ryder. I'm not with any publication. I was just curious to listen to you, all four of you talk maybe about, you've discussed how we're so split right now, where if I want to watch people saying one thing, I can go somewhere. And if I want to watch people saying another thing, I can go another place. How do you see that changing? How do you see getting stories out to the masses in a way that I think was a lot easier when there were much fewer outlets? Thanks.
I think it's a longer process, actually. I think it starts with both curriculum and concerted efforts to teach literacy, media and news literacy to small children, and then move it on up. The problem is a lot of us in this room started at a time where you could at least count on several credible sources. You thought they made mistakes, yeah, but they did reporting. They came up with good stuff. Now, with the media landscape so splintered, I have to keep correcting people that all media is not journalism, right? So don't put that stuff on me that some other people are doing, but it's really hard for people to tell. Even people who are smart and who really pay attention to media have to be very careful about looking at the sources and identifying what's credible. So it's a long process, but it begins with our understanding that everything that we read, we need to be evaluating with all of the questions that the people who teach this say. Where did this come from? Who is the source? How is it documented? Who benefits by this? This is what we have to pay attention to if we really want to have good information, and we got to teach the kids differently. By the way, the Stanford report last year looked at, 1,200 kids across the country and these are media online natives. You see that they could understand and detect the differences. They could not. The scientists used words like shocking, appalling, scary about the level of lack of understanding on kids that you would think have some comfort level in arenas that maybe older people do not. So it's not a good thing.
I would
question in the
briefly add.
back.
I would briefly add that we also need civic literacy.
Absolutely.
More and more people do not understand our institutions or the purposes for them. I saw a poll recently where a polling outfit asked Republicans a hypothetical question: if President Trump proposed delaying the 2020 election because he asserts that there's voter fraud, how would you feel about it? And 50% of them were just fine. At the point that we no longer have any respect for institutions other than whatever Donald Trump wants to do with them, if that's a significant body of opinion, that's a problem. I mean, people do not understand the function of the courts, the legislature, the president, the balance between the three at all.
Walter, just briefly, because we want to get to a
I
couple of
understand.
questions.
But I think it's really important to say that one of the biggest challenges we all face is how to revive local media, because to a large extent, the hollowing out of local newspapers in medium-sized communities is one of the more horrific events of the last 15 years. And to a large extent, people often got their national news from wire service reports while they were leafing through their local newspaper, wondering what the menus were in the elementary school cafeterias, or what's playing at the movies. The breakdown of all of those local newspapers is one of the most difficult challenges we face, and it has ripple effects in national politics.
But there's no answer for that right now.
I'm mourning. I'm not answering.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well, one thing, let's not cut public media funding, because you really won't have any local
I
reporting.
know.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, we have one in the back.
Yes, testing.
Can you
Yeah,
identify?
can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Lisa Naj. I'm a local physician, and I was on the television show White House Chronicles this week discussing toxic exposure and cognitive impairment. And I wrote a blog a while ago on Trump being toxic. And his brain is obviously not functioning at maximal capacity. And I noticed that patients who become toxic and unwell from exposure, they have a lack of caring for others, and they lose their ability to be magnanimous, and they don't care about anything but guns and money. So I wrote this article about some Republicans being impaired, and then when they get well and they're no longer ill, they care for others and they care about public programs. And I just thought that would be an interesting thing to throw into the mix, because it's obvious that he's not thinking straight. And I think now the theory that I've developed is that it's pesticides from the golf courses that he's been on. No, but I'm serious. You know,
Okay.
that's probably the most likely
You don't need
exposure
to
that he's had.
All right. Thank you. I think we have a question up here on the front row, second row. Thank you so much for that comment.
Dorothy Tucker from Chicago. Each of you talked about, it sounds like you're saying that
Can you
Trump-
hold the mic?
It sounds as if you're saying Trump is invincible. What would it take for him to be impeached, for him to not get reelected? What do you think it would take? He has survived so much. What shot?
But didn't you already say you didn't think that was going to happen, right?
Because I don't think the people are going to stand up. Richard said he thought that there's some vulnerability in the House, and that, what do you know about Russia? You said if they were convinced that Russia was real, then they would stand up.
Yeah, you know, I think we're looking at 2020, basically. And can he be beaten in 2020? Sure. But the Democrats really need to get their act together. What they need to do, among many other things, is try to be a national party again, run more people local and state level who are persuasive and fit their district, but also have a broad economic message that speaks not only to the people in the Trump base that can be peeled away, but to people everywhere who share the same concerns. You know, be they black or Latino or white or Asian or whatever. They want their kids to have decent schools. They don't want their kids to be swamped with debt. If they're worried about their jobs, they at least need to be offered the hope of job retraining. They need universal medical care that keeps them from being decimated by medical catastrophes. You know, they need the kind of security that makes caring for their own families and then caring about other people possible. And the Democrats have to symbolize that, and they have not done a very good job of doing it.
All right, I want to ask the final question here. We have amazing numbers of people in this room and a spillover downstairs, which says to me that people are concerned about what's going on in our country today. So as a final comment, could you please, if I'm making the right assumption about the presence here of people, what can they do? What can people who want the country to remain great do?
do whatever you can. First of all, participate in a reasonable opposition. I'm sorry, but a vote for Jill Stein or Gary Johnson was wasted last time. And voting is not just a means of self-expression. It also a mature judgment about which possible choice is the best. Certainly in a moment of extremity, as we have, but people need to talk to their friends, they need to talk to people who disagree with them, they need to give money, they need to get involved, they need to engage, they need to create a wider safe space, to coin a phrase, for people who are concerned about moving this country forward in a humane and inclusive direction. And whatever anyone can do, whether it's advocacy, writing, talking, giving money, participating, it needs to be done.
And Kelly, as you answer the question, I often hear from people who say that even within their families, there are such divisions and differences of opinion that they get to be quite toxic and harmful. So how do you do what Richard just suggested, talk to people you don't agree with, and then answer the general question of what can concerned citizens do?
Well, some of us have to put ourselves up to be punching bags in public situations sometimes, and just to make certain that there is a mix of conversation and viewpoint, and that you're there, you're at the table to have that discussion. I think from a political standpoint, since we're talking about the party, that the Democratic Party is going to have to, and I'll be looking at this closely to write about, figure out what is purity in terms of candidates. And what, is it about getting people elected? Is it about a general message that everybody can get behind? And are you going to be so picky about where everybody stands all along the spectrum? I don't know. I think that's something that's going to be very undermining. I think there are a lot of women now who are, and I'm mentioning women specifically, who are learning how to run and who are running. And that's something to watch as well. And I also think that
and we have one sitting right on our front row, Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton from the District of Columbia.
But to Richard's point, a lot of these women never have been involved civically in that way or thought of themselves in that way, and they're out there. 2 or 3 people approached me the other night saying, are you talking about this? And I said, yes, I'm going to be talking more about it. I also think that we cannot overlook the civic engagement that is happening and support those people. I was really impressed by the handicapped folks that went to those offices and allowed themselves to be pulled off their wheelchairs to say, this is really serious. You're talking about our lives, and we're not going to just stay here and allow you to do it. We're going to make a statement, and we're going to keep coming back. That's, as I don't have to tell you, Charlayne, was what folks always said in civil rights movement, keep coming back, keep coming back. People have to understand this is not a short-term thing. This is a long game. And if you get tired around month 4, then you weren't real serious. That's just the bottom line.
And Walter, we didn't get to the issue of what many people say is motivating Trump supporters, which is fear. So in your closing remark about what people can do, how do you help overcome the fear that seems to be motivating a lot of the Trump base?
Let me start off with what I wanted to say, and then I'll just add something about fear. And that is that I think the most important thing in America right now is to have the broadest possible anti-Donald Trump coalition. I mean, for example, when Republican Senator Jeff Flake from Arizona just wrote a very critical book of Trump, the response from a lot of Democrats is, but he didn't vote right on health care. I mean, the point is we are at a severe constitutional moment, and this is not the moment to be picky over the things that reasonable people disagree on, whether it's health care, whether it's the level of taxation in this country, and that I think that the quest, as Callie mentioned, for political purity is one of the most self-destructive things the Democrats can do going into 2018. I was appalled to discover that Claire McCaskill, a good senator who has a very tough race in Missouri now has a primary opponent who thinks that she isn't liberal enough. She is as liberal as she can get away with against the backdrop of Missouri politics, and it may not be enough. But as far as fear, we have to understand that too many people have been left behind, and that we have to talk about how, in real terms, to revitalize the economy, and also to stop this worshiping of great wealth, that if you run a hedge fund, you are somehow smarter than anyone else. Because I think part of what's going on that's motivating the Trump people is the feeling of arrogance of the 1%, arrogance of the wealthy, arrogance of the financial sector, and that I think it is having corrosive effects on our democracy.
Thank you. Thank you all. Peter?
Just want to say again,